All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, you wanted to do a reaction video with me, and apparently it's COVID related, and I had a bunch of COVID stuff queued up. But before we do that, I want you to react to a video about
Oh
reaction
no!
videos.
Oh no!
It was funny that you texted me that because I was listening to this at the time, and I want to get your input on it because he does have a good point here, and but also we have to well, I'll let you comment first, and then I'll give my
Okay.
own. Share with sound. All right. So this is going to be the question and the answer. He's talking to a fellow YouTuber, last name Thurston, who's also a fitness YouTuber.
But if someone was starting up a channel now, we were talking about this earlier on, what advice would you say? Someone's listening and they go, I fancy making a YouTube channel. I'm prepared to sell my soul to the devil. I'll go as low as I need to. I'll play any role that I need to. How would you, from first principles, just say, this is how to get to 1 million subs as quickly as possible if you're prepared to sell your soul?
Yeah, if you wanted to, with the absolute minimal work required, you can just pick up other people's content, viral content, and just react to it and have some sort of animated reaction, which will provide people some form of entertainment. And you're just kind of piggybacking off other people's amazing work, which is kind of like quite questionable. But if you want to grow very quickly, that's one way to do it. Another way, it depends.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this was for that shallow reason of reaction videos, especially with that in the title, are pretty clickbaity. And um annoyingly, annoyingly for the for me, the consumer, but I guess good for us, the producers, YouTube pushes those kinds of things if you so certain types of content clearly get shadow banned and they don't like certain things and you have to dig to find certain topics. But if it's something shallow like reaction and you happen to watch one, all of a sudden your homepage is half reaction videos. Because I watched a couple just because they were interesting and about topics I like, music in particular, and it was someone watching music videos and reacting to them as a voice coach. Um, this is like this was someone who is like a classically trained musician and voice coach, and she was watching Iron Maiden. Um, which one is it where he really screeches out up there? I don't remember the title. Anyway, so it was that kind of thing. It was something that was not just sponging off of someone else. So that's what's so frustrating about this kind of content is there are times where it can be really good if you have something to add,
Mm-hmm.
right? And and you see this is one of the reasons I don't follow, and even the few news sites I follow annoy me with this, where just to get pages and clicks, they will write articles about what someone said on Twitter. Like, how is that news? That anyone who's interested in those individuals or topics would already be following along. It, it's one of the ways Twitter's influence way exceeds its reach. And lots of people have talked about this, about how something like maybe 10% of Americans are actually on Twitter. And
The last I heard was 20%.
okay, so
Yeah.
it may have gone up, but the number I kept hearing was 10. That may have been guesstimating downward because of bots, but you wouldn't think that the way newsmakers talk about Twitter and the way they pay attention to what's trending there. And that drives me bananas. That's that's just sponging. You're not adding anything. It's not like, you know, if I was to write like a blog post, but back when I was trying to get my blog going, I would write short essays basically. So if something was trending on Twitter, I would cite that as the spark, as the introduction, and then it's let's have some deeper thoughts here, Jack Handy style, right? As you go on, and this is where the internet should be good because uh nerdy historical analogy here, the lead up to the revolution, the American Revolution, was decades long. And a major part of that, and what formed the underlying government philosophy of America, was the back and forth uh in newspapers and in pamphlets, because you could print out just a little handbill, a pamphlet, relatively easily. Probably the most famous would be the Federalist Papers. That's kind of what they were doing, and then everyone forgets there were anti-Federalist papers too. And they would go back and forth in these public debates, but it wasn't, you know, just the standing on the street corner shouting at each other. It was, you know, collect your thoughts, present your cogent argument, cite your points, and then the other side does the same thing with their counterpoints. So I guess what I'm trying to old man rant about here is be more discerning with these types of things.
Yeah,
You
I didn't
know?
think I didn't think I was going to get such an in-depth reaction to that video, but I'm going to stick with the he's actually right. Don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah.
But one of your sub points in there was, is there substance to the reaction or is there not? You know, you see this on the short form reaction videos like Instagram Reels or TikTok or something, where there's something that's, you know, funny on one side or has some substance on one side, and then they're just kind of like making faces as their reaction.
Yeah.
And or trashing the person on the other side. You see this with a lot of cooking ones, where they're like, "Oh, you're doing this. Oh, that's stupid. Oh, and you're going where with that?" And they don't even actually add any substance to it. They just have little quips, like you would see Gordon Ramsay do on TV, only not as funny, and without the professional clout to go behind it. So it's yeah, it depends on what substance you're adding, and I'm assuming because it's COVID related, you're looking for my analysis of what's going on and on a
Yeah.
numbers basis.
And the other thing I thought would be useful here, to in a reason, a substantive reason to do it as a reaction, is kind of like when you wrote that program for me in real time, so that people could see the process. So uh this is a video that's going to be talking about numbers and talking about some epidemiological concepts as well. And so my thinking was, let's show in real time how you fact check that. Now, this is a channel I've been following for a while, and about subject matter I know well enough to take them at their word, and know that if they do make a mistake, they correct it after the fact, either on their social media or on their podcast or on a subsequent video. So I have been following them long enough to take their word for it, but obviously you don't want to do that if you don't know and trust the source. So how do you fact check these kinds of things?
All right, so let's get to the video. Share with sound. Okay, apparently it's from China Uncensored is the channel. And let me big screen it. Oh, how long is this? 13 minutes? Are we going to need to go through the whole 13 minutes or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Could be dead in China in just the past few months alone, and the party knew it was coming.
The other reason I want to do this is because I enjoy his snarky style and wanted to boost the signal with what little we could.
Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Here's a question no one wanted to ask. Can 1 million Chinese people die and nobody know? It's kind of like wondering if a tree falls in the...
Yes, the answer is yes, because this is just like discussions about India. I think I brought up I hate the education comparison numbers because
Mhm.
the top 1% of India are educated and the other 99% are not, but we're only
Mhm.
comparing to those. A lot of China is what we would call a third world country.
Oh yeah.
We're thinking of Wuhan, Shanghai, Hong Kong when we think of China. We're not thinking of province out in the middle of nowhere that's still farming with hand tools.
They still refer to their rural population as peasants. And part because that's how they live. When you hear the term peasant and you think of like a medieval peasant, that's how a lot of them still live. So it's not just that they're poor, it's they're still living with few, if any, modern conveniences and technologies.
I like where I paused him there. It's kind of like Ben Affleck had a stroke.
forest and no one's around to hear it. Does it make a sound? Except no one's around to hear it because 1 million people died. For the past several months, a wave of COVID swept China, and the Communist Party knew what to do. Stop counting cases, as some models predicted 1 million or more deaths. We have absolutely no idea how many people have died in China since the first COVID outbreak more than 3 years ago, or since the end of zero COVID this past December, especially since hundreds of millions of elderly Chinese live in the rural countryside where there's really bad medical infrastructure and no data collection. But the Chinese government stopped counting, so
I would like to point out here that when people were talking about comparing to the African countries, this was the rebuttal to why we couldn't compare to them.
Mhm.
Because they were saying, oh, well, it was much worse there than we know because they're not all in the cities or going to the hospitals. But when the shoe's on the other foot, we're supposed to just accept the numbers. I'll go ahead and bring their charts up later after this, so you see exactly how unrealistic they are.
nobody died. Hey, maybe if we stop counting, inflation won't seem so bad. My NFTs won't have become worthless, and my cholesterol won't make the doctor yell at me every time I go in for a visit. For a lot of the pandemic, China operated under a strict zero COVID policy. Entire cities were put into lockdown, sometimes for months. People starved because there wasn't enough food. Mass testing became a daily part of life in China. And then suddenly, it all stopped. Late last year, the Communist Party ended zero COVID almost overnight, and the country was totally unprepared. Within 6 weeks, almost 80% of the country was infected. As I said, we don't know how many people died because officials were told to stop counting. But body bags piled up, and crematoriums burned bodies around the clock. I've seen zombie apocalypse movies that had a more successful response than zero COVID. The Chinese Communist Party should have just called their plan Red Dawn of the Dead. Chinese hospitals were so crowded, ambulances were turned away. And everywhere, there was a shortage of basic medical supplies. Why wasn't the Communist Party more prepared? China's pursuit of zero COVID has resulted in a low level of natural immunity among the public, leaving the population vulnerable.
All right, pause there. That
Millions
was
of
one of the
elderly
big points that I thought needed exploration. And also one of the reasons I wanted to do this video is because I thought maybe we can talk about these things that we kind of talked about a couple years ago tepidly because you weren't supposed to talk about this. But maybe it's allowed now if you're talking about China and not talking about, a Western country, if you know what I mean. But this is what brain fart is named Gert Vandenbosch.
Gert Vandenbosch, yeah.
Vandenbosch. This is what he was talking, and this was my rant. I think the last time we talked about COVID, which was the science didn't change. The science didn't change. The narrative changed. There were credible people, experts in the field, talking about these exact things from the beginning. And one of them was, you do not react to a pandemic this way. We never have, and for this reason.
We're
That
unvaccinated. Not that Chinese vaccines are that effective anyway. Chinese vaccines are like using a screen door to keep.
Well, this is one where you're seeing a lot of I don't want to use the word conspiracy theories. You're seeing a lot of conflicting theories, I should say, on this, because there's the Chinese vaccines that aren't good, is one that's out there, but then there's, on the same side of the aisle, people saying they're not taking the Western vaccines because they know it's a bioweapon. So you're seeing a lot of these kind of alter hypotheses coming out that kind of conflict each other, that are all playing into each other. And this is where I will say some of it is a little conspiratorial.
Well, what's his name? I can't remember what his title is. The head health guy in Florida, DeSantis's health guy in Florida.
Oh, yeah.
He
Starts with an L.
he talked about this a couple weeks ago, citing papers that showed after 7 months the efficacy of our vaccines were negative. I don't remember if that was just one of them or both of the major ones or what, but there again, something that was being said by experts in the field from the beginning is we've never been able to produce a coronavirus vaccine before, and there are reasons for that.
It's too contagious and it's too adaptable to its environment. Now he said the screen door to keep out water. There was another guy I saw on Dr. Drew. He used the analogy, it's like trying to keep mosquitoes out with your chain link fence.
Yikes.
Keep out water from the garden hose. Gonna be some breakthrough cases. So why didn't China have a
Well, that's actually a point I wanted to make on the tracking, because remember when it was the hospitalizations and severe illness in the inoculated versus the not, we weren't even tracking that. We weren't tracking breakthrough infections after May of 2021 because the CDC said it would cloud the water.
Yeah, I remember because the people I was listening to at the time who were talking about this were having to use the British and the Israeli numbers because they were providing the best data, the most, and by best I mean the most stratified and complete.
Yeah, except when the Israeli numbers contradict the narrative, which we're going to get to after this video, because that's what I had prepared.
And there then came a point where even the Israelis stopped being so diligent, shall we say, where even they said, we don't need to be tracking all this stuff anymore.
plan to deal with the end of zero COVID? Well, according to new information just revealed by the Associated Press, China did have a plan, but everything went wrong. I'll tell you more after the break.
I need to fast forward.
What is the real story of January 6th? Many people have asked that question. Some people have described what happened on that day as...
There we go.
Welcome back. At least I hope there was an ad there. YouTube is basically trying to run us out of business by cutting off ad revenue, especially for covering crazy conspiracies like the Chinese Communist Party covered up where COVID came from. The only reason China Uncensored exists is because of support from viewers like you. If you want to keep seeing China Uncensored,
yes, crazy
please
conspiracies
the
for the thing that's literally on the name of the building.
But everything went wrong. A perfect example of all the problems of a communist system. By late 2021, there was already major public pushback to zero COVID. Massive citywide lockdowns in places like Xi'an left people starving in their homes. So Chinese leaders began discussing how to lift restrictions. Now, this is new information. The AP just discovered a report to China's State Council from March 2022. In the 100-page report, top medical experts submitted detailed proposals to prepare for a gradual exit to the State Council, China's cabinet. It included things like proposals to boost China's stalling vaccination campaign, increase ICU bed capacity, stock up on antivirals, and order patients with mild COVID-19 symptoms to stay at home. Wow, that actually sounds sensible. So sensible, I assume they stole the idea from other countries. And then the Communist Party, true to form, made a horrible Chinese knockoff of these plans which broke down immediately. Because March also saw a deadly outbreak of COVID in Hong Kong. Around that time, COVID also began rapidly spreading through Shanghai. Now, initially, the local government responded with a lighter approach, what they called precision controls, which were equally insane, like locking down a single bubble tea shop that's somehow too precise and not precise at all. That's like if you have an infectious skin-eating virus and say, don't worry guys, I covered my toes, you're safe. Turns out Shanghai's precision controls didn't stop the spread. So in typical communist fashion, the government responded by swinging to the other extreme. They put Shanghai into a brutal 2-month lockdown, where yes, people were again starving.
And
People were
buildings burned down
furious.
with people
Yeah.
locked inside.
Actually, they were mildly
Pause it.
employed since they were too hungry to be
There
free.
was video of people
Then the Communist
you know,
Party doubled.
jumping from their apartments because they were starving to death. And they decided they'd rather die that way than starve to death. One of the reasons that what's been going on in China the last several months is such a useful example is because it is so extreme that it is a stark illustration of problems elsewhere that might not be to that extent, but those issues are still there, and we're still seeing it. We've talked about it a little bit when we talk about the excess death numbers and what he referred to earlier with the Washington Post article about how the lockdowns throughout China were so extreme that people's immune systems atrophied, basically.
We got a closer to home example of that. Look at the illness numbers from all causes in the states here in the United States that stayed locked down, not locked down and with measures longer than the ones that didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all cause illness. We're talking RSV, we're talking flu, we're having a resurgence of flu. Flu is horrible this year. So, but you're really not seeing it in places that opened up a year and a half ago, like Texas and Florida and Arizona. What's another example? I think Idaho is another example.
Yeah.
You're not seeing that because, yeah, we had that little blip of not challenging our immune system, but it really wasn't long enough for a big adaptation. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's a shame because, especially with the children are in the young children are at an age where that's going to they could have positive permanent effects to exposing themselves to pathogens, not just COVID, but other things. And now we don't even know till 20, 30 years from now when they're actually at an age where they're going to be really negatively affected by something that's minor to a young person. Mm-hmm. Because their immune system didn't adapt in its key developmental years.
Yeah, I mean, people joke about, babies eating dirt. It's good for your immune system. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Well, that's my common answer when someone's like, "Oh my gosh, I have a cough," or I'm like, "Don't worry, I played in the dirt as a kid."
And we've used that example before of staph. There are a gazillion staph bacterias.
Yeah, still I'm going to knock on wood. All those years of wrestling, MMA, and working in a gym, and I've never had a staph infection.
Because if you are regularly outside, you are regularly encountering these bacteria. If you're digging in the dirt because you garden, or you're out in nature going for a hike, whatever, you are encountering this bacteria, and your body is constantly strengthening itself from that pressure. All right, so now you never go outside. So you never encounter these bacteria because you're a super germaphobe. Okay, what happens when you encounter a germ? It's not going to go well for you.
Well, you hear the trope when you go to Mexico, don't drink the water, right? They're drinking the water, but you will get sick if you drink the water because you are not used to it.
Yes. Only drink tequila. The other point about the Chinese response as an illustration is the lunacy of the politics of it. And that's what he's getting to a little more here about how the zero COVID idea and so the response to it was a political response. It was a political measure to protect the ruling elites. And when reality started to slap that in the face, they just started gaslighting people. And the same dang thing is happening here and now. If you're paying attention at all to any of the nonsense coming from Trump and the Republican primary, how he's trying to rewrite history about how great the Republican governors were. We had some great Republican governors that didn't lock down at all or only locked down very lightly, except old DeSantis. He closed the Florida beaches. It was disgraceful. You were on the phone yelling at Governor Kemp in Georgia because he was trying to open up early. Stop rewriting history and stop playing politics with this crap.
Down on zero COVID. This editorial in state-run People's Daily said, resolutely uphold zero COVID, and quoted Xi Jinping saying, persistence is victory, which effectively meant that any criticism of zero COVID was forbidden. One of the Chinese experts who was censored told the AP anybody who wanted to say something that is different from the official narrative was basically just silenced. They may have run out of medical supplies, but they always had more than enough black bags lying around. Welcome to communism. You see, later that year, in October, there was a major meeting of the Communist Party, the 20th National Party Congress, where it was expected for Xi Jinping to essentially declare himself leader of the Communist Party for life, which he did. So the party wanted to keep a tight grip on society and COVID in the lead up to it. And if there were millions of deaths, that would have reflected badly on Xi Jinping. At the same time, though, growing public resentment and the fact zero COVID was killing China's economy was making it abundantly clear that zero COVID was not sustainable and also not really effective. COVID kept spreading anyway. For example, authorities locked down Zhengzhou, a provincial capital home to over 10 million people, with no public announcement, even though they were reporting only a handful of cases.
All right, pause
or there
there.
may have been a lot more than just a handful.
All right. I think we've probably seen enough. If you want to start digging into your sources, you get the idea there. And again, a couple of things that we've talked about, and to reiterate, this shouldn't surprise anyone. Once again, remember that China locked down Wuhan to domestic travel, but not international travel, while they kept assuring the world that this new coronavirus was not human-to-human transmissible, all the while knowing that it was. We shouldn't be surprised by any of these shenanigans, and by shenanigans I mean bald-faced lying. The other thing to point out is the similarity with how US officials reacted, because authoritarian's gonna authoritarian. And there was pretty much a daily counter on the nightly news of COVID deaths and hospitalizations during the election. And then after Biden won, it kind of went away for a little while. And then they decided that they needed the narrative, they needed the issue, and so then it became the boost to vaccinate. And one of the tactics was to go out there and say that we're going to issue these regulations through the Department of Labor, knowing that the court will almost certainly strike it down, but by the time they do, we'll have gotten a lot of people vaccinated. And they never actually instituted the regulations because then you would have something to take to court. They just threatened it, and companies started doing it on their own.
We'll get into that a little bit more in a second. This kind of brings up the public response too. So I recently listened to Piers Morgan on trigonometry, and they actually challenged him on some of his stances early on in COVID, because he originally made very abrasive posts about, if you're not getting your vaccine, you're blah, blah, blah on society. And he has since walked that back and has publicly apologized, even though you don't hear that unless you actually follow him, because no one's going to cover that. And they challenged him on that, and he owned up to overreacting to it. But there's a very important point about it, that he was taking responsibility fully, and he was trying not to make excuses. But the underlying thing was there. We were told differently. We were told that you cannot transmit the disease if you were vaccinated. And that's what he was going on. He had some personal bad experiences with friends and family dying, and he was told you cannot transmit it. And that's huge, because when you're talking about a communicable disease, that's the only reason to force other people to do it.
The CDC had up on their website that the vaccines would stop transmission months after they themselves, many months after it was known that that was not true, and then still months after the CDC itself admitted it. And the claim was still up on their website.
You know, that's a nice little segue, because what else does the CDC still have up on their website? Let's look. This is, again, you can look at the top, cdc.gov. I am not making shit up here. Myocarditis and pericarditis after mRNA COVID-19 vaccination. They actually have some more proper stuff on there. And they're really harping this, and really depends. This is the old Bill Clinton, depends on what the definition of is, right? Depends on what the definition of rarely is and what's acceptable there. So we'll give them the word, but we can still debate the degree, right? And they do have proper things up here now. So it is more common after the second dose, usually within a week, which actually leads strength to it's actually caused by. But then we get to this line here.
Six months and older.
The known risks of the disease, complications, etc., are greater in the from the disease than the inoculation. We also have this one here, and I'm looking for, I had a specific one. Oh, nope, not there yet. We're not ready for that.
Did you see?
What got me thinking about this was the Rand Paul grilling the Moderna.
I was about to ask if you saw that,
because he
up.
made the quote of the risk of the disease for this particular thing is greater than the risk from the vaccine. So they still have that. CDC still has that, but there's unfortunate complications to that. What are their sources for this? And here's one of them. Remember this paper We broke this down a year and a half ago or a year ago. This was the one Sanaptra Gupta quoted on the Rogan show.
Yeah. Sanjay Gupta, the CNN
Sanjay Gupta. Yeah, no,
medical guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sanjay Gupta. Yeah. So this was the one he quoted on there, which we're comparing. The quote is, the risk with the disease is greater than with the inoculation. Remember, in this one, the inoculated population was excluded from the study. So can you make that statement based on this study? Inconvenient truth. We'll just toss that one out. We've already gone over it in depth. This paper was much more interesting. This one I had to read a couple times. It shows a much greater risk in here. Okay, so of the infection versus the inoculation. So if we're looking through all of these, we'll go down to their tables, and then we'll go up to what I have highlighted there. Where are the tables? Okay, so we've got very big population samples. We've got the breakdown of their ethnicity and their sex. Then we have the age groups, and this is infection, and this is inoculated. This is infection, this is inoculated, okay? So we're seeing on the left side, infection, much higher numbers as we go over these age groups than in the inoculated side. That seems to support the statement, right? Much higher numbers. And we're looking at more than 2 times for this age group. And this is the age group in question, really, for most people, because it's the most common to see that side effect. And pretty much the same in these other groups. So this one seems to support that statement. Now we'll go back up to what I highlighted. Because in the discussion section, they give their limitations. Oh, crap. I unhighlighted it by highlighting those other things. Where is it at? Discussion. Okay, the findings are subject to these limitations. One limitation they did not include, and I'm not going to go through the order here. I just have it highlighted for everybody's purposes here. It didn't include any vaccination plus infection, whether it was infection then vax or vax then infection. So those were all thrown out. So that's already one limitation. Minor inconvenience, but that would have been a good number to have, because then our risk reward ratio could have included, well, I've already had the disease. Do I want to go get this? Or I've already had the disease and then the vax, and do I want to get dose 2? Or all of these other questions that would be nice. Here's my thing on research: collect all the data and write the paper on the thing you were studying, and then the data is available for everybody else if they want to use your numbers for their hypotheses. There's more younger people in the infection group than there is in the inoculated group, which makes sense because it wasn't rolled out for the younger age groups till later. But from the stratification standpoint, the age group in question is the younger group. And I have, as one of my notes, it's the wrong denominator. They have a very convoluted way in this discussion of saying, well, you know what, when we threw out our net, but because of the way we gathered our data, you're collecting, you're going to end up erring in the direction of people with the underlying condition that have the disease versus people who get the disease and post the inoculation. And what I'm trying to say there a little more simply is, if I have cardiac issues and I go into the hospital for those cardiac issues, and they test everybody who comes into the hospital, and I happen to be positive for it, even though I'm showing no symptoms, I'm going to show up on the left side. If I go get the inoculation and I have mild issues that I don't even, that really don't affect my daily life, I am not likely to go to the hospital for these issues. So there's already one skewing to the left side, because someone who already has a heart condition underlying would be lumped in that because they're testing everybody who comes in the door.
And other papers and studies I've seen about this issue made a point of segregating that data of no previously diagnosed cardiac issue.
Which
That,
they did not do here.
yes.
So that aside, we go down to acknowledgments and the conflicts of interest. This is where the conflicts of interest start. So this is they kind of give a general overview of the conflicts of interest. Then they have to go into an explanation of why all of those conflicts of interest exist. This is all of the funding that the people who conducted this research are getting, and this is by individual author. This is by the whole team. So basically, this is the CDC's own people. Now, MMWR, the publication that published this, is the CDC's newsletter or publication. So when you talk about peer reviewed, they reviewed their own people, is what they did. And all of these big studies that support the CDC are in MMWR, not in Cell Magazine or, BMJ or
Gee, it kind of
JAMA
sounds like
or
what we talked about last time, where Fauci set out to get a group together to write a paper with the conclusion he wanted about the natural origin of the virus.
So let's look at some of these sponsors here. Here's one. I don't know if they have anything to do with who would be wanting a positive result here. I can highlight a few more if you want. Oh, here's one. There's a big one. I think we can say there might be, just maybe, the thought of a little bit of conflict of interest here. I'm not going to conclude one way or another, because then you're assigning intent and motive. But this fact exists. So this is the best citation that CDC has for their statement. And it seems pretty damning till you really go through the limitations. The other thing that's a wrong denominator here is when we're looking at the younger age groups, especially for COVID positive test, that means you had COVID bad enough that you went and got tested. The denominator should be seroprevalence, i.e. I had it, not I had it so bad that I went and got tested. And as we get younger, we know that number is greater that had it and didn't know it, that had it and thought it was allergies. Yeah, because at the time of publication here, where's the public? Here we go. At the time of publication here, the seroprevalence in our adolescent aged young adults was like 80-85%.
That we cited those numbers. I don't remember who first put them out there, but we brought up those studies last year, at least. I think it was last spring that those numbers were coming out, showing 80-something% of children had already had COVID.
So again, inconvenient truths. So we're going to go ahead and put that one on the back burner, because we have stuff since then that keeps coming out. Here's one I've brought up before. Vax-induced myocarditis, a systemic review. If you age stratify, those numbers flip, is basically the conclusion of this. Where's my charts? Here we go. Males aged. So this is from another paper. This is actually, I got the preprint up here because it was easier to read and note, but it's actually in Circulation magazine, which is a major publication for cardiology. Males age less than 40. What you're looking at here is first dose, second dose of, I think this is Janssen. It might be AstraZeneca though. On this side, it might be Janssen or AstraZeneca. First dose, second dose, third dose of Pfizer. First dose, second dose of Moderna. And all the way on the right here is COVID itself. 7 times more likely to get myocarditis from the disease than from the jab. This doesn't look like 7 times more than this, or even this one. Definitely not 7 times more than this one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a more clear picture. Now in the actual publication, so this is from Circulation magazine, they removed the boosters because they realized in their publication, the preprint, they just didn't have enough data for that to be statistically significant. So they went with the ones that were. So nice clear picture here. Again, this is Novavax and only having COVID-2 versus shot 1, shot 2 Moderna, shot 1, shot 2 Pfizer. I'm still not seeing a 7 times risk. Definitely not the 15 times risk that the first paper that Gupta cited had. And again, this is under 40. Imagine if this was 16 to 22 or 12 to 16 or one of those developmental ages where your heart is super active as a male because, we kind of front load our cardiac health because we need to hunt and fight and all those things in nature. So even with this big group that includes that 30 to 40, which almost had no incidents at all, you still get these numbers. Inconvenient truths.
And the CDC or the FDA, I think it was the FDA just a month or two ago, basically approved doses for newborns.
Mm-hmm. And they uninvited the panel members that were going to vote no, by the way. So just so you know. Are you going to vote yes? Okay, come on in. Are you going to vote no? Oh, then don't even come to this meeting.
That part I had not heard.
Yeah. Well, one of the panel members came out and said so.
I heard someone make a good point. I wish I could remember who, so I could give credit that, well, this doesn't make any sense because why would a company poison its own customers? You're not the customer. The government is. That is one of the continuing problems with this issue is there is zero accountability by the manufacturers to the recipients because the recipient isn't the customer. Governments are who keep paying for these things.
Now here's another one from a different magazine. This is Nature magazine. Again, we're looking at higher incidence under the age of 40 for certain things other than the natural. There's one more inconvenient truth that's coming out. Again, think of that net that's catching myocarditis and positive tests. How much of it, and this is the big question from the beginning, how much of it is people with myocarditis that come in and test positive for COVID versus people who got it from? Let's go to
died with versus died from COVID. Something that,
Yeah.
again, that there were people asking that question from the very beginning, and it wasn't until like 18 months to 2 years into it that the powers that be started acknowledging that that was even a question to be asked.
Let's go to that Israeli data again. This is a study out of Israel. And they studied incidence of myocarditis, pericarditis, post-acute cardiac events of COVID-19 infection. There's your abstract. Here's the link to the entire article. I'll put those in the show notes. Let me see if I can blow this up. Can I? Yes, I can. All right. Dark line. I'm told that's red, but I see black. And then the light line is no COVID. Do we see excess? If we took the trend line and not any given time, I'm not seeing excess here. Let's go down to pericarditis. Again, the dark line is COVID. The light line is no COVID. Do you see an excess there? I do, but it's not in the population in question.
Okay.
Uh-oh. There's a monkey wrench in the machine. Long-term study, hundreds of thousands of people. There's no higher. This is more similar to that first one that Gupta.
Uh-huh.
Are you catching them in the net because you're purposefully putting your net in a certain place? Or are you throwing a broad net out and actually looking at what comes up? Israel threw a broad net. The entire population versus actual people who were infected. And you saw no difference there. And I want to add to that, their cohort was not Omicron. It was Wuhan Alpha and Beta. I think it was pre-Delta as well. But so
I'd be curious about follow-up numbers now, because you showed that the study before, and that huge line on the graph for the Pfizer second dose. Israel has been using exclusively Pfizer. So I'm curious if they've bothered to do any studies on that.
So if we take all of those things, all of those data points, and put them together and try to paint a picture from it, the real message coming out of today is, how did you conduct your study to get the numbers? And what is the denominator on the SARS-CoV-2 side? On the infection side. So Israel had a much broader testing protocol than we did. They caught people that were not symptomatic. That's where the whole asymptomatic thing came from. And based on their numbers, based on the broad testing protocol, there was no difference from general population. So is the number in the CDC studies blown up, or is the broad number not representative of what's happening? There's your question. And if you take the in-betweens, you see that the more you talk about infection versus positive test, the more it swings in the direction of this may not be causal by this thing.
And so that is the nuts and bolts, the numbers on the sciencey part of it. For the public part of it, and where we started off with what has been going on in China the last few months, are the powers that be who are instituting policies and recommendations, do they have any grounding in these facts? Or is it just more of the same? And probably for some reason other than the stated public health interest. Because we just talked about the CDC and the FDA recommending these vaccines for younger and younger and younger. Why?
Based on what?
What?
The
Why?
research? Well, let's look at the research. Let's debate on the merits of the research. I showed you a study that, I think I X'd it out in my anger at having it up. It was the one that had all the funding. Their 6 things that were limitations to the study said everything we're saying. They told you why they could be wrong. They told you why their numbers could be skewed in a certain way. And yet, our largest governmental health organization is still touting it as this is an absolute statement I can make. The incidence of myocarditis from the illness is greater than the disease or than the vaccination. They are making that statement as if it's a statement of fact. It's just like we know that 1/3 of all African Americans are going to be incarcerated in their time. No, you don't. That's a flawed study based on a bad mathematical model, but it's published in the Bureau of Justice Statistics. So therefore you can cite it and you won't be lying on the stand. That was in air quotes.
I'm pulling up the transcript from Senator Rand Paul. I spoke with your president just last week, and he readily acknowledged in private that yes, there's an increased risk of myocarditis. The fact that you can't say it in public is quite disturbing. Not just that you can't say it in public, but remember the exchange later. You have children. Have you vaccinated your children? I have. How many times? 3 or 4. That is not rational, scientific based behavior. That is cult-like behavior.
Well, not only is it cult-like behavior, but it's anecdote versus population data. We got a survivor bias there. He vaccinated his kids 3 or 4 times, and nothing happened. But the numbers showing about 1 out of 1,000, maybe more. It's a 1.1 to 1.5 out of 10,000, which would be 10 to 15 out of 1,000 are having an adverse effect. There's like 10 million kids under the age of 5 in the United States, right? There's another 30 million between 5 and 20. 15 out of 1,000 is how many out of 1 million? Is 1,500 out of 1 million? Keep going from there. 1,500 times 20, that's a lot of people.
Yep.
If this was a murder rate, we'd be screaming gun control, right?
I guess we need syringe control. Oh, I probably shouldn't have said that.
Well, they have the don't ask, don't tell at the like if you go to your Walmart. Clean needle laws, man.
Yeah,
stops you from reusing needles. I benefited from it one time, because when I had the cauliflower ear, you use an insulin syringe and suck it out, and I had to go get them from there, and they all looked at me like I was a druggie, but I was like, no, can you not see my balloon on the side of my head? That's what this is for.
All right. Well, I got a hard out. Hopefully we have
Giggity.
provided something of substance there that will be both not just informative on these particular issues, but on the broader scale of how do you approach these issues? How do you fact check? How do you dig through data and think through these problems?
Yeah, and this is how you avoid cherry picking too, because we looked at sources from both aisles, and one was just raw data on one side, and one was how can we collect the data in a certain way and what can go wrong there. I mean, I'm sure there's issues on the other ones, but they're so subtle and small that it's not as big a deal. But yeah, I think that's the main thing. We presented both sides. I talked about how my thinking came out of that, and you make your own conclusions. You just saw both sides. I'll link it all in the show notes.
All right. Well, we will see y'all next time where we have more fun and exciting things to talk about.
Yeah, next social episode will be workout stuff, I think, and what else were we going to talk about? Sexy time stuff.
Yeah, following up on what we talked about last time.
Yeah, and then the next episode is Wheel of Time. And as far as when the last one came out, I have no idea what was going on, but every time I tried to upload it, it would stop at 70%. And so you don't know that till about an hour and a half in, and it just sat at 70% for the last 30 minutes. I don't know what was stopping it, but for some reason, just like the 5th attempt, it went through. So I'm sorry it came out on Saturday night instead of Thursday, but that was what was going on.
All right. Well, we'll have another one Thursday, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. It will be filmed Thursday when it comes out. But it might have had something to do with the fact that we had to put together 2 videos, and there might have been some slight file corruption or something on the combining of them. I don't know. I don't know how those things work. Someone who knows coding might know better.
Our brains have thick candy shells.
Yep. All right, later.